today. I really appreciate that you are here today. This seminar will be recorded. And so just so you all know that way it will be accessible after the second seminar. If you want to go back and listen to it again or share it with anybody, it will be available. So once again, welcome. I thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. The purpose of the next two webinars, and it's great if you're joining us for one, you're welcome to join for both or just one or the other, it's totally up to you, is to give a little bit of information about what it looks like to do a renovation. Renovations are very popular right now. They have been for a while, especially during COVID. And so I wanted to chat as a professional in the industry to give information for people who are thinking about the process and just really don't know where to start. It can feel really overwhelming, and sometimes just getting a bit of general information can help a lot. So as I mentioned, there's going to be two sessions. Today, we're going to start with who do I call first? And so the purpose of this is to look at what are the typical team members that are on a renovation project? What are the types of renovation project? And how do you even start? So that is going to be the topic of today. So welcome, as I already mentioned. Again, the session will be recorded and available after next week's second session. Questions, we happily welcome questions. I actually enjoy the Q&A probably the most out of all of this, but we would ask that you put your questions into the chat. We will be monitoring those throughout and answering them at the end. So I'm going to try really hard to keep the presentation to about 25 minutes so that we have about 15 minutes or 20 minutes for Q&A at the end, and we'll have you out of here about 12:45. If we run over and people are happy doing Q&A, feel free to stay. That is great. And then also, if you have further questions after this presentation or you'd like to connect in person, the contact information for myself and our team will be on the last slide. So let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about our team. We are S3 Interior Design. We are an interior design firm, and we are a team of 6. I am the owner and business developer, also professional interior designer. My name's Tracy. I will just point to the pictures on the screen. Carrie is our senior designer. She's been with us for many years. Zoe is our intermediate designer. Josh is our junior designer. Linda is our administrative assistant. And Tia works with us in marketing. So this is our team. An overview of what we're going to look at today. So the first thing I want to look at is the 3 methods of running a project. So what are the types of projects that are out there, and what's the description of them, some pros and cons of each? The second thing is, what are typical team members in a project and what are their roles? And then third, when does each of those team members come onto the project? And when should you be connecting with them? So let's start with number 1. The 3 methods of running a renovation project. I've broken it down to 3, which are the ones that I see most often in our industry. There may be more, so don't discount this as an exclusive list. But the 3 that come to mind that are most common, especially with residential projects, but these can also be commercially, these can also be for commercial projects. And I just want to clarify too that they can be residential, commercial, they can be small scale or large scale. First one is a do-it-yourself, DIY. I think that term has become very popular in probably the last 10 to 15 years. HGTV does lots of series on DIYers. And basically a do-it-yourself project is when the owner self-manages the project. The owner decides how much or how little they will invest in outside professionals. The second one is design build. This is a team approach. It's where the design team and the build team are a cohesive unit from the beginning to the end. The third one is called a design bid build. This is very typical in the commercial world. It's also used in the residential world. And it's when the design and the build components are run separately from one another. I also call this a siloed approach. The design occurs, then the tendering occurs, then the building occurs. It's very sequential. And I'm going to just describe in more detail each of those types of projects and some of the pros and cons of each. So do it yourself. Again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, do it yourself is where the owner takes on full control. You are running the show. It is your project. You decide who comes and goes, who you hire. You decide if you're swinging the hammer yourself or if you're going to bring on professionals. So the pros of a do-it-yourself is that it is generally more cost-effective because you are managing the project yourself and you're often doing a lot of the work yourself. So it's a cost-effective approach. You have complete freedom of selection. So from the materials you're going to use, to the trades you're going to bring onto the project, you have complete freedom. And then full control, again, which trades are you going to bring on? You know, your neighbor Joe as the electrician and your buddy down the street who does some framing, complete control. The cons of a do-it-yourself project is that it becomes a full-time job for the owner. So you are the GC, again, you might be the electrician, you might be the framer. It becomes a full-time job generally. The other thing is that all decisions and liability fall on you. So the benefit is you get the complete freedom of selection and control. The con is that it's all up to you. So if something goes wrong, there's no one else to look to. It's going to be your responsibility. Someone mentioned to me before here, and you also don't know how it's going to turn out. It could be great, you know, it could be fantastic. It could be a complete disaster, but that could be for any project. But I thought I'd throw that one in there. Design build. So again, this is the team approach. This is where you have a design team and a building team that comes together at the very beginning of the project. They are instrumental to working with one another. They generally know each other and have been working together for years. Sometimes it's one company under one umbrella. Sometimes it might be a separate design and build company, but they have a really, really good working relationship and they totally trust each other. Another one of the pros is that issues can be detected early on because everybody's integrated right at the beginning of a project. If a designer designs something and then shows it to the builder and the builder says, hey, you know what, I think we're gonna have a problem over here because X, Y, or Z might not line up for that design, you can be revamping that design before you get too far along. So you're catching things early on. At the same time, you're also probably measuring costs throughout. So when you're choosing something, you can talk to the designer, can talk to the builder, can get it priced, can go, hey, you know what? This is going to be a more cost-effective option. So again, you're measuring and you're weighing those things throughout the project rather than doing it all at the end. Shorten timelines. What I mean by that is that because the designer and builder are working together, once you get to a certain part in design, if everybody feels comfortable, the builder may be able to go pull permits before the last finishes are selected. Or they might be able to order a material that the client knows that they want. Client's set on this type of flooring. The flooring has a long lead time. The builder says, hey, you know what, I'll go ahead and order that before the project is officially started on the build side. And it can shorten up those timelines. The quality of work is controlled. And by this, I mean, again, that working relationship. The framer knows the drywaller, knows the painter. So everybody is very cautious that their work is going to affect the next person and the next person. And so generally there is care as the sequence of events happens and the quality of work is controlled. Overall, because there's this team environment, the owners feel really taken care of. They know that someone has their back. And so that's a really good pro to a design build. The cons, pricing may be less competitive. Because you are bringing on a team that works together, you're not going out and tendering 3 bids from the electrician or 5 bids from the flooring company. The designer and the builder are going to pick the people they trust that do the best work that are going to follow timelines. And so they're not going to necessarily go out there and look for the cheapest price. And so it may not be as competitive a method as the next one that we're going to talk about. And again, owner has less control because the team is organizing the trades and such. It's not like the owner's not going to say, hey, can Bob, my cousin, be the electrician on this project? Because the team already has an electrician, and it's nerve-wracking for them to bring on someone they don't know, because they don't know if they can trust the quality of their work and the timeliness of their work. So generally the owner doesn't have that control to choose the team members within, like, once you get into the sub parts of the team, it's controlled by the GC or the designer. Let's move on to design, bid, build. As I mentioned, this is the siloed approach. So everything happens very sequentially. You have the designer do the design, then it goes out to tender or bid. And so you get the pricing for the design, and you generally go out and you get maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different bids from different companies. And then you decide which price you like the best. So do you want the cheapest? Do you want the most expensive? Do you want somewhere in the middle? And so, and then once the job is awarded to the contractor, the building starts. So the pros of this is the owner, in a sense, has more control over the team, because they will select the design team, they will select the build team. It doesn't come as a cohesive unit. As I mentioned, it's extremely sequenced. And then the pricing may be more competitive because you are going out for multiple bids. The cons are that it's a lengthy process. So because you finish all of the design and then you have to do the tender and then you have to do the build, nothing overlaps with each other. You don't have a builder who's going to take out a permit before the design is done, because you don't know who the builder is until after the design is done. Issues are not detected as early. So as I mentioned, design build, where you've got a cohesive approach. In this case, the design is completely done. Then the builder comes in and they might catch things once they're actually reviewing the drawings, but by that time the design is done. And so that means that you have to go back and redesign if you decide you want to make selections. It's not happening in the moment as much. And so consultants and trades are concerned primarily for themselves. This isn't supposed to sound as selfish as the line makes it sound, but basically what happens is each trade is part of their own unit. They're not necessarily they don't necessarily know each other. They haven't necessarily worked together before. So everybody, again, in that siloed approach, everybody's working kind of within their own stream, in their own lane, and they're not necessarily as cohesive a team. So let's move on to, now we know the types of project that you can do it yourself, design build, or design bid build. Who are the team members that come onto a project? There are many, and I've laid out 6, which are the ones that, again, in my professional experience, are the ones you're going to be working with the most. And so you have the architect, you have an interior designer, you have engineers, you have a CET, you have a contractor, and you have trades. And so now we're going to go through each of those. And please be reminded that depending on the scope and scale of your project, you may need 1 or 2 or 3, or you may need all 6. And so it really depends on your project specifically. So an architect is a professional who designs and provides advice, both technical and aesthetic, on buildings and landscapes. Their expertise is generally on the shell and the exterior of a building. I always describe the difference between an architect and interior designer, and the way we think is that an architect designs from the outside in, and an interior designer designs from the inside out. So an architect generally focuses on the exterior of a building. That's their primary concern. And then they move on to the interior. It's their secondary concern. They also have an expertise in code. And so things like, is a building safe in terms of fire, being able to exit a building in a fire, and things like that, that is their expertise. Their education is a master's degree from a post-secondary university. And they would also need to do professional exams in order to be registered as a licensed architect. Their role on the design team, and I'm going to flip back for 1 second. When I talk about design team, I'm talking about architect, interior designer, engineers, and CET are generally the ones that make up the design team. So an architect may be a member of that design team, or they may lead the design team. And when are they required? And so by law, an architect is required when you're dealing with a commercial or generally a multifamily project over 6,500 square feet, because they will be required to do code analysis and life safety analysis and put a stamp on the drawing. So by law, they are required whenever those kind of code analysis, life safety elements are required by the permit. And so obviously you don't just use an architect when it's required. You may also use an architect because you want a fantastically designed custom space, a custom home or a custom building. So that's where an architect fits in. Interior designer. So also a professional who designs and provides advice, both technical and aesthetic, on building interiors and furnishings. So as I mentioned before, an interior designer thinks from the inside out. So our primary thought process is looking at the inside, the interior design, and then we look at the exterior as our secondary. So we do both. We just do it in the opposite order generally. We also have an expertise on finishing the interior with furnishings and accessories. So we do a lot of space planning. We decide how the layout of a space is going to go. We do have a lot of technical expertise, and then we can also finish off a space with furniture. Our education is generally a bachelor's or a master's degree. And we also have professional national exams that we have to do to be able to qualify ourselves as professional interior designers. The discussion about decorator versus designer, that could be a whole different webinar. If you have questions about that, please feel free to put that in the chat and I will be happy to answer that. The role, again, very much like the architect, we can either be a member or the leader of the design team. And when are we required? There's no legal requirement for a designer because we can't stamp a drawing, at least not at this point, maybe in the future. But generally we are brought on when someone wants their space professionally looked at, making sure it functions well, that it's aesthetically pleasing, and that it's just, yeah, that it works. Engineers. So engineers are very scientific. Their training has to do with complicated structures, products, machines, and systems. An engineer is all about calculations and codes. The typical 3 types of engineers you work with on a building project are structural engineers. They want to make sure that the building is structurally sound. Electrical engineers, making sure everything electrical is working in the building. And that mechanical engineers, so your HVAC systems and all of that, heating, cooling. And so engineers have a bachelor degree and a professional exam, and they are generally the members of the consultant team. Generally, what happens is an architect or an interior designer will bring the engineers onto the project, depending on which ones they need. They are required when you have a commercial or multifamily project. Again, if there's anything that requires calculations and stamped drawings to do with structural, electrical, or mechanical, they are required. And so when you are looking at a residential project, generally you will need a structural engineer on a new build or renovation where you're looking at changing any of the load-bearing capacities. Electrical and mechanical engineers are more so for commercial projects. Could be used residentially, but not as often. A CET is a certified engineering technologist. They are practical specialists in design of structures, products, and machines, or systems, sorry. Basically what happens is often in a firm, the CET will do the drawings and the engineer will stamp them. So they very much work on blueprints, and they are very technical. They know structure, they just can't stamp their own drawings. And so, as I mentioned here, their expertise is technical drawings. They cannot stamp. They usually have some type of a college diploma or degree, like a Red River degree. They are a member of the consultant team, generally brought on again by the architect or designer. And they are not required, but used by most engineers and designers to produce technical drawings. So for us, for instance, if we're designing a new home or an addition, and there's foundation work, there's roof structure, there's wall structure that needs to be designed, we will bring on a CET to work in tandem with us to do that work. Then you have your contractor or project manager. And this is the person who is responsible for pricing, coordinating the day-to-day oversight of a building, and then obviously getting it built. And so their expertise is in construction methods, pricing, schedule, and permits. Generally, that their education could be a college education, a vocational education, or on-the-job training. Their role is usually building the team. They're coordinating the trades. And they may be hands-on, they may be swinging the hammer. Some GCs are project managers, not so much. And then when they're required, well, if you're not going to do it yourself, you're going to be hiring a contractor or a project. And then the trades. So they are the skilled laborers. They require they have manual skills and special training most of the time. They are the hands-on guys swinging the hammer. They are the electricians, the roofing guys, the framing guys, the finishing guys. I put down roles here. There are many more. I just didn't want to fill the whole page. But in general, they're the hands-on people that are building your building. And so they generally have either vocational college training or on-the-job training. And then again, you are going to use some type of trade in almost every building project unless you are a very skilled DIYer. So when should each of these team members get involved? So I'm going to go through 3 slides, one describing each type of project that we have gone through at the first step, and sort of go through how you bring them on a project. So this is the DIY project. Looks a little messy because it sometimes can be a little messy. So again, the owner is the center of that project. They control everything. And so the yellow squiggly lines that you're seeing is sometimes the reality of it. So you get an owner who wants to start a DIY project. Some may not know as much as others. And so as you go down the path and you decide, oh no, I actually don't want to design this by myself, or I need an engineer, or now I need some trades. Sometimes there isn't a fluid step-by-step approach to this. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm in trouble. I need to call the engineer. Now I need to get an electrician. Now I need to get an architect. And so sometimes it's all over the place. The dark arrows represent the flow that would be best if the owner called the designer, who then brought on the CET and the engineer, and then brought on the trades. That would be a good system. It's not always that way in my experience. Design build. So as I mentioned, we've got the owner here. The owner decides to bring on a team. So they call the team, which consists of generally the architect and or designer and the contractor, who are a unit. The architect and designer would bring on a CET and the engineers. The contractor would bring on the trades, and the team is design, bid, build. That's our siloed approach. We have the owner speaks to either the designer or the architect. Again, we don't know who's leading the project. There may be one or the other or both. So it's okay for an owner to start with either. Then again, that designer architect would likely bring on the engineers and the CET. And then at the same time, as these drawings are being done, as the design is being done by the design team, which is here, then we start to get the bids done, which is happening here. We have tendering, which happens with the contractor in tandem with the trades, and then we build. So again, very sequential. And that is the outline that I have for today. I pretty much did it in 25 minutes, which was the goal. I am now really curious to hear your questions. So Carrie from my team is going to jump on with me, and she has all the questions that are hopefully in the chat. And we're going to just go through these together. So thank you so much for listening.
Hi, everyone. Feels weird kind of just like sitting in the background and then jumping in. There actually wasn't any questions that came through while you were going through your presentation, Tracy. But you did mention that you might touch on the difference between a designer and a decorator. So I thought maybe you could answer that question, because that was the one thing that I wrote down as you went through. So
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so designer and a decorator, I often describe this as a spectrum. So you can't see my hands necessarily. I'll try and put them here. At one end of the spectrum, you have a very technical space. Let's say you're working on a home renovation and you are gutting the space and you need to put new walls in place. You need to look at where your lighting plan is going to, how it's going to lay out. You need to look at all of the millwork, cabinetry. You need to look at all the finishes and the fixtures. So it goes from space planning to figuring out what goes into the space in terms of what's built in, all the way to putting in that furniture and the last piece of art on the wall. So if we start over here as the very technical and over here as the aesthetic, an interior designer starts over here on the technical side. So that's where we have generally we have the university education so that we can be speaking to those technical things. We run all the way from the gamut from beginning to end. So we can do everything from the very technical to the more aesthetic, whereas an interior decorator would start further down that process. They wouldn't be looking at space planning and technical parts of a drawing. They wouldn't be doing necessarily high level detailed drawings, but they would be looking at more what happens when the space already exists, the four walls already exist. How do we embellish those four walls? What are we putting on the walls? Paint, flooring, aesthetic light fixtures, furniture, that kind of thing. So again, they would come in more once a space is already happening and they want to fill it versus creating the space. Hopefully that answers. If you can add anything, Carrie's a very big expert on this. So if I've missed anything, Carrie,
I'll jump in there. Tim had a really good question that came up. He said, is S3 involved in all three types of the renovations that you've spoken about today?
Yes. So we are an interior design firm. That has been our expertise for the last 18 years. And we have been involved in many design builds. And we, more recently, to our repertoire, have added project managing residential renovations. So we're not project managing anything bigger than that at this point, but we can be your design team and we will bring on a build team that we trust thoroughly. So yes, that is the answer. Hopefully that answers it. Answer your question, Tim.
Okay. And then Lynn asks, if a client starts a DIY, but then realizes they are in way over their head, what do they do?
Do you remember the squiggly lines on the diagram? They first of all panic and then they go, who do I call? Yeah, it happens all the time. Give us a call or call whoever you think. Now, it depends where you're at in the process. If you've started a DIY and you've taken out a wall and you're realizing that your second floor is caving into your main floor, don't call me, call an engineer fast. If you have started and you're thinking that, you know what, there's so many choices. This is what happens on a lot of DIY projects. Carrie, you can validate this, is that you start and you're like, well, you know, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to go to the store. I'm going to pick out some flooring, and then I'm going to pick out some lighting, and then I'm going to pick out some cabinetry. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, there's like, within each thing that I have to pick, there's like 7 sub things I need to pick. And it just becomes so overwhelming, and you realize that you have a full-time job and you can't be at the store every day and you can't be tracking things. That's when people often call us and go, or they're about to make a big financial purchase. So they're about to order, let's say, their kitchen, and it's going to be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 of cabinetry. And all of a sudden they're like, what if this isn't the right choice? And they really need someone to come in and give them some professional advice on that. So who to call? depending on what you're doing, call the appropriate person, but generally it would be a designer that you would call, because it's often when it comes to the finishes that people get the most overwhelmed, I would say. Would you agree, Carrie?
Yeah, that sounds good. Peter has a question. I think you might have touched on this already just in that answer, but just about a homeowner, if you had concerns about possible structural issues that might already be present, if they recommend actually still coming to us as a first point contact, or if they should go more to an engineer to start. I guess it really depends on what that structural issue is. Like you said, if it's an immediate problem, like you notice your bearing is not being supportive, an engineer would obviously be the first point. But I would almost say too, and Tracy, you can obviously jump in here, but you're probably looking at having all three anyways, right? So it probably isn't set in stone which one you absolutely have to contact first.
Yeah, I agree with that. It really depends on what your intention is. So if your intention is to bring on a team and have a team, and I'm gonna sidebar for 1 second. S3 is we have done each method of building that I've talked about, the DIY, design build, and the design bid build. Our preference has become very strongly design build because we feel very firmly in the team approach. If you are starting a project and you're not sure who to call first, but you're thinking you're going to need all the components, as Carrie mentioned, you're going to have someone design it and you're going to have someone professionally build it, then I would say design comes first, because a builder, a lot of times people will call a builder, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the GC saying, hey, you know, what can I do with this space? And they'll say, how much is going to cost? Well, to me, that's kind of like going to buy a car and asking the salesman, how much is this car? How much is the car going to cost? And you guys are going to go, well, are you buying, you know, a Toyota Corolla, or are you buying a BMW? Like, I need to know what you're building or what you're buying before I can tell you what it's going to cost. So a lot of clients will call a builder. The builder will come in. They will give an idea of what they want. And the builder will go, I think we could do that for $100,000. But they have no idea what the design is at this point. So it's a very loose number at the best that you're getting. So if you're thinking of hiring a team, bring on the design team first. So whether that's a designer like ourselves or an architect, get the design done on paper while the team is looking at it from a contractor point of view. So have that team brought together, but start with design and then building will come.
Great. Tim had a follow-up question. He's actually a tradesman. So he needs some help with creating some creative options for some of his renovations, but he does plan on doing the work himself, having a hard time creating his vision. So which of the design team members would you recommend he bring on to help create the vision of their space?
Okay. I'm going to assume this is potentially an interiors project. Is that clarified, Carrie?
Was not clarified.
Yeah, it would be the inside of our home,
okay,
not the outside.
Okay. Definitely a design team would be an interior design professional would be best. And you've got to find the design team that is the best fit for your project. So for instance, a lot of designers will take on projects where they will just do a concept for you and you can run with it. Other designers are more firm that they want to be able to do the technical drawings and they want to be able to follow through with construction like a design build. So you just have to make sure it's a good fit in terms of a team. So for our team, what we start every project with is a discovery consult. I'm kind of jumping into some information that's going to be on next week's webinar, but we start every project with a discovery consultation. You can go to our website and read about that. It basically allows us to learn what you need. And so we spend 2 hours with you. We go through a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions to find out what it is you need. And then we discuss what a go forward plan may be. So maybe we've answered all the questions that you need in those 2 hours. Maybe you need a lot more work. And then we talk about how we can move into alternative work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question here from Sheila. Sheila said, thinking of doing a kitchen reno, hiring a designer to come in with the ideas and then take that to a kitchen company or question mark. So I guess she's wondering whether or not you need to do both, right?
It's a really good question. You don't have to do both. So here's the analogy I'm going to use is if you're thinking of doing more of a do-it-yourself approach where you're managing the different components of the project, which is kind of what I'm hearing here, you can go to each one of those different places. So you can go to the kitchen design place, they will come out, they will measure your space, they will do a preliminary kitchen, well, they'll do a kitchen design for you, which is what they'll use to order the product if you decide to go with them. And then you can go to the flooring store and you can get help from the person at the flooring store. Then you go to the lighting store and you can have the person there give some feedback on where to place your lighting and what type of fixtures you might need. So you can do all of those as little kind of a la carte items and manage the cohesiveness of the project yourself. The difference when you hire an interior designer is that we're looking at that project in all parts at once. So we would never come in and look at your kitchen and go, just want to discuss the cabinets. We would be thinking about the cabinets, the backsplash, the countertop, the flooring, the lighting. We'd be thinking about that all at the same time because we're going to envision it as a whole. And so that way we know that when you order the cabinets, they work with the flooring, which works with the countertops, which works with the backsplash, which works with the lighting. So instead of it being a la carte, it's a holistic approach. So, so to answer your question in a shorter form, yes, you can go straight to the kitchen place and they will do drawings for you, but they will only be thinking about the kitchen. So if you're thinking about the space as a whole, you'd have to go to each different supplier to get information for each of the different parts.
Okay, we got another question here from Jordan. Says, hi, Carrie, do you guys do build house/cottage designs from scratch? Is it mainly renos to existing? I.e., if we have a vision of a house layout, but we don't have any plans, can you guys work from the ground up?
Oh, you want to take that one, Carrie?
I can take that one, sure. The short answer is yes. We've actually worked on many house drawings from scratch. Lots of the times people do come in, like you say, where they've got kind of a pre-formed idea of what their floor plan might look like. If I'm being brutally honest, we prefer for you not to even have that because we like to be able to put our creative ideas into the floor plan, and often find sometimes when you have kind of preconceived layouts that you found online or stuff like that, it's very hard to manipulate them without them all of a sudden just growing into this large scope that you don't necessarily need. Whereas we'd rather sit down with you and go through all of the wants and needs and then figure out how that all flows and connects together to create something that's truly unique. But yeah, we've done many new builds and love doing them. So
yeah, and just to add to that, when we're thinking about the team that we put together, so we as designers, interior designers, we can't obviously structurally stamp drawings. So we always put a team together. So we would lead the team, we would bring on a CET, which I mentioned is a certified engineering technologist. So the way we work is we create the floor plan because that's our niche, that's our expertise, is making sure the space works really well. And then we would get the CET to do the foundation drawings, the technical, the wall details, the roof details to make sure the structure is correct. Then the CET gives those drawings to an engineer to stamp them for safety and for their structural components. So yes, we can absolutely design a house from scratch. We love doing it. Be happy to help.
perfect. I think that's it.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. I'm just going to move to my next slide here for a second. So next Tuesday, same time, same link, we have our second session, which is what should I expect? So this is where we're going to dive more deeply into the actual design process. And we're going to talk candidly about timelines and budgets. And so if you're thinking that you're going to do a renovation or a new build, there's lots of good information here. We're going to dive a little bit deeper. So I hope that you can join us. If you think of anybody else that you know that might find this information valuable, please get them to sign up or send the link to them. And thank you so much for taking your time today. I'm so excited. We actually did meet our timeline of being done by 12:45. So hopefully that allows you to have a bit more time on your lunch break. Our contact information is on the screen right now. info@s3interiordesign.com. Those emails will come directly to me. Our phone number is there and our website is there. So please check those out. If you have more questions after today that you didn't feel comfortable asking in the chat or that you just thought of after this call, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer that. So have a great rest of your day, and I hope that we will see you here next Tuesday.